Last week, I did my best to point out a disconnection in the conversation between what Jesus was describing and what the crowds were expecting. Jesus was describing the bread of life, when the crowd was thinking about bread that they would eat. When the crowd requested it always, it was like saying, "Yes, Jesus, give us that bread every day, the bread you're talking about." Jesus then attempted to cue them in, even in his response, saying, "Whoever comes to me will never be hungry." Not to dwell on this point, but it's worth noting. The crowd asked Jesus to give them this bread always, over and over again, each and every time they were hungry and needed to eat. And his response is that they will never be hungry again. Not only is what they are being fed changing, but so is how they are being fed. Today's gospel is a continuation of Jesus' teaching on the bread of life that we find in the 6th chapter of John's gospel. And in today's reading, starting with verse 35, Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." And then he ends today's reading with, "And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh." Jesus makes a statement and then a promise. The statement is that he is the bread of life. Then Jesus promises us that he will feed us because he has told us that I will give it. So we might ask, great, when will Jesus give it? I think there are two answers that may come to mind quickly. One is at the crucifixion, which is later on, chapter 19 of John's Gospel. Jesus Christ, the sacrificial, the paschal lamb given for the sake of the world. The other answer would be at communion, as we are reminded of those words of Christ, "This is my body, given for you." Both of these are true. Both of these are ways that Jesus feeds us. This may beg another question. Where will Jesus give it? On one hand, Golgotha, that is the place of the skull, where the crucifixion happens. On the other hand, it's wherever two or more are gathered with staple food and festive drink, remembering that night on which he was betrayed. Though I'd like us to consider a different question. How else does Jesus feed us? A friend of mine was recently talking about how, for most of the key events in his life, he can remember specific meals. For example, the salmon at his wedding, which he said was the best fish he had ever eaten. Or the tomato and mayonnaise sandwiches his grandmother used to make late afternoons in North Carolina during the summer, with Duke's mayonnaise and Cherokee purple tomatoes. Then there was the dinner his family shared after his mother's funeral, when he wasn't even hungry. But the chicken that his aunts prepared was made with the same recipe that his mother used, one that his grandmother taught his mom and all of her sisters, baked with a lemon pepper drizzle, and those flavors working together made it feel like his mom was still in the room. So this got me thinking, what meals do I remember? And the short answer is, to be honest, not a lot. I remember being on a mission trip in Bulgaria and ordering lunch at a restaurant that never brought my female chaperone, my friend Jill, her entree. Just a few weeks ago, Jill reached out and texted me, said it had been 9 years and she's still waiting for her entree. I remember being in Alaska in 2017 at a restaurant overlooking a bay, and when I asked the waiter what the special of the day was, he pointed at the bay through the big picture window and responded, "Whatever they bring out of that boat in about 15 minutes. But here's the thing. I realize that these are more memories about meals than memories of the meals themselves. I remember that special of the day in Alaska was fantastic, but I can't tell you what it was. However, when I consider my life and all of the places that I've lived, in each of them, The thing I can certainly remember are the places that I ate the most often, the places where I became a regular, if you will. During high school in Roxborough, North Carolina, it was Torero's Mexican restaurant. I went there as often as I could with my buddy Jason, a place that to this day, if we find ourselves near Durham County or Person County, we will go out of our way to make it back to. At my first call at a church in Connecticut, it was a place called the Wooden Tap, where I met other regulars who became trivia teammates and then friends, and remain some of my best friends to this day. Of the original three of us, myself, my friend Aaron, and my friend Bonnie, I had the privilege of officiating both Aaron and Bonnie's wedding. When I think back to those places, I can tell you what I always ordered because, like a lot of people, I do tend to order the same things at the places I go to the most. And to be honest, my orders at those places are etched into my memory, if by sheer repetition, if nothing else. But when I look back, what I realize is how I was nourished at each place in ways that had very little to do with eating. It was not the enchiladas at Torero's or the cheeseburger pizza at Wooden Tap that I remember the most. It's the people that I shared those meals with, the communities that developed by going to these places time after time. I think we all have memories that we go back to time and time again. The simple and everyday things that have a huge impact on our lives and help us identify ourselves because of how often we do them and how important they are to us across the years. Jesus knows this. And so, speaking to the crowds, Jesus invokes the memory of the Israelites in the wilderness a number of times here in the 6th chapter of John. We know this story well, the Exodus story. Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go," and initially he does, well, kind of. And then, during their journey to and around the promised land, God feeds the Israelites by sending them manna every morning and quail every night. My favorite tidbit about this story, the story of the Exodus, is that manna is translated that way from a Hebrew word meaning roughly, what is it? It stems from that question. So the thing that keeps the Israelites fed is, what is it? Every morning the Israelites get up and gather, what is it? This story that is so well known that Jesus invokes to speak to the communal history is about God providing what is it? But here's the trick. Enough what is it over time allows us to see what it is. Enough meals shared at the Wooden Tap over the years has left me not remembering what I ate, but knowing what that place meant to me, to my life, and the friendships that I made within. Jesus' invoking of the Exodus story doesn't dwell on the bread or the manna, the what is it, but it points us to what it is. What it is community taking root, with generations of people gathering around together and seeing themselves as people of God. What it is the power of God feeding people for 40 years while those people every morning would ask the same question, what is it? What it is what God is doing to and for the people, generation after generation, leading and guiding and feeding and building community every single day. It's kind of like going to the gym. You wake up and you look in the mirror, and then you go to the gym, and when you get back, you look in the mirror again, and you probably don't see much, if any, of a change. Then the next day you wake up and you do it again, and again, and again. And each day you ask, what is it that I am doing? When suddenly, 6 months later, a year later, you look in the mirror and you notice what it is, as a different and healthier you is looking back at you. It didn't happen in a day, but it happened over days. I cannot think back to one meal at Wooden Tap where I became a local. It just happened over time. I cannot think back to one event in my life in which faith just switched on for me. It happened over years and years of God's what is it feeding me in so many and various ways. In youth group and First Communion, on mission trips and talking to mentors. In liturgy, committed to memory by sheer repetition on Sunday mornings, if nothing else. In all those ways that Jesus feeds us one day at a time. Yes, Jesus is the bread of life, and he will feed us. How does Jesus feed us? On the cross. Yes, he has done that. At communion, yes, he has done that too, and will continue to do that again and again, his body broken for us. Though he also feeds us through prayer and hymns and worship, in fellowship and in outreach. Jesus feeds us day after day, week after week, in prayer and community, gathering in his name, in the love of this community, held together by his love, his body, and his blood. The Word was made flesh to dwell among us, and then that flesh was offered to the world. Sometimes we see it. Sometimes we only see it when looking back. And other times we too are left asking, what is it? But whatever it is, the truth is that Christ is still feeding us. Thanks be to God.